My mother, Margaret, humiliated my hungry children at her birthday dinner, tossing them napkins while my sister Serafina's kids ate $65 pasta. "Your kids can eat when they get home," she snapped. Her husband laughed. So I, the family's pro bono forensic accountant, set a trap they never saw coming. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The fluorescent lights of the hospital waiting room had seared themselves into my memory, a harsh, buzzing counterpoint to the sterile quiet. I had been at my desk for 48 hours straight, closing the books on a year-end audit for a major client when the call came. It wasn't my husband, Mark, who was overseas on a business trip. It was the school. My 10-year-old son, Jack, had taken a hard fall on the playground and broken his arm in 2 places. By the time I arrived at the restaurant for my mother's 65th birthday dinner, I was running on fumes and the dregs of lukewarm coffee. Jack's arm was set in a bright blue cast, and my 8-year-old, Sophie, was clutching my hand, her little face etched with worry for her brother. I was a wreck, pale, exhausted, and wearing the same creased blouse I'd had on for 2 days. I hadn't had time to go home, let alone feed my children a proper dinner. I'd called the restaurant, La Pura Vida, a place I couldn't possibly afford, and my mother, Margaret, had assured me it was all taken care of. "Cora, you look dreadful," were the first words out of her mouth. Not, "How is Jack?" or "Are you okay?" "It's been a long day, Mom," I murmured, sliding into the booth. My sister, Serafina, and her husband, Jasper, were already there, looking like they'd stepped out of a magazine. Serafina, a lifestyle blogger, was taking artful photos of the bread basket. Jasper, a financial advisor with suspiciously perfect teeth, was swirling a glass of deep red wine. "Well, try to pull yourself together," Margaret said, her eyes flicking to Jack's cast with disapproval, as if it were a fashion accessory she found tacky. We'd been there for 20 minutes, the kids growing visibly restless when the waiters appeared. But they didn't bring menus. They brought out a series of large, elegant-looking boxes and placed them in front of Serafina's 2 daughters. "Oh, marvelous," Serafina trilled, clapping her hands. "Mom, you are just the best." My children watched, eyes wide, as their cousins unwrapped boxes of creamy, truffle-topped pasta and individual, decadent-looking chocolate lava cakes. The aroma was agonizing. Mom," I said, trying to catch her eye. "The kids are starving. I thought we were ordering." Margaret waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, I pre-ordered for the important people. Serafina's girls have such refined palates." Jack, bless his heart, whispered, "Mommy, I'm really hungry." Sophie's stomach let out an embarrassing, growling rumble. I leaned in, my voice low and tight. "Mom, what are my children supposed to eat?" Margaret looked at me, her face hardening. She picked up a small stack of cloth napkins from the center of the table and tossed them onto the empty placemats in front of Jack and Sophie. "Your kids can eat when they get home," she said, her voice loud enough for the neighboring tables to hear. A shocked silence fell. I stared at the napkins. My children stared at the napkins. Then Jasper, my brother-in-law, let out a short, barking laugh. "Should have fed them first, Cora," he chuckled, raising his wine glass in a mock toast. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot, creeping flush that prickled my scalp and burned my eyes. I looked at Sophie, whose lower lip was trembling. I looked at Jack, who was blinking furiously, trying to be brave, his blue cast a stark reminder of the day's trauma. And in that moment, something inside me didn't just break, it calcified. It turned from hot shame to a cold, hard, and frighteningly clear resolve. For 15 years, I had been this family's financial workhorse. I was the one who managed my mother's retirement portfolio, filed her taxes, and balanced her checkbook, all for free. I was the one who quietly fixed the little mistakes I always found, the strange cash withdrawals, the gifts to Serafina that were never documented. I had always told myself it was just my mother being flighty, that Serafina was just a bit irresponsible. But sitting there, watching my children be denied food while my sister's children ate $65 pasta, I saw the cruelty for what it was, intentional. And the implication hit me like a ton of bricks. If the cruelty was intentional, the financial mistakes were too. I looked down, took a slow breath, and whispered to myself, just loud enough for my own ears, "Copy that." The waiter, oblivious, glided back to our table. "Can I get anyone else?" "See another drink." I placed my own napkin on the table. Slowly, I stood up. My legs felt shaky, but my voice was pure ice. "Actually," I said, my voice cutting through the restaurant's murmur, "you can bring me the check for the whole table." Margaret's eyes widened in surprise, a flicker of greed warring with her confusion. "Cora, don't be silly, I'm paying." "No, Mom, you're not," I said. I pulled my wallet out, but I didn't take out a credit card. I took out my business card, Cora Jensen, CPA, Forensic Accounting. I placed it on the table. "You're done paying for anything." The betrayal was worse than the hunger. It was a starvation of the soul, and I had just been served my last, empty plate. The ride home was a blur of silent tears. Not mine, I was far too cold for tears. They were Sophie's, quiet, hitching sobs she tried to muffle against the sleeve of my jacket. Jack was stoic, his jaw set, staring out the window with a miniature version of the same rigid anger I felt gripping my spine. I'd stopped at a drive-thru, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hand over the cash, and bought them burgers and fries. They ate in the backseat with a desperate, mechanical hunger that shattered what was left of my heart. "Mommy," Sophie whispered, her voice thick, "why doesn't Grandma Margaret like us?" I met her eyes in the rearview mirror. "Oh, sweetie," I said, my voice cracking for the first time. "This has nothing to do with you. This is not your fault. This is a grown-up problem, and I am going to fix it." "Copy that," Jack muttered from beside her, mimicking me. I didn't know he'd heard me at the restaurant. A small, grim smile touched my lips. "Copy that, buddy." When we got home, I put the kids to bed, gave Jack his pain medication, and tucked them in with extra kisses. I promised them a pancake breakfast. I promised them a movie. I promised them things to erase the memory of the napkins. But I knew the only thing that would truly fix it was justice. The house was dark and silent. Mark wasn't due back for 3 more days. I walked into my home office, the room that was usually my sanctuary, and flipped on the desk lamp. The warm pool of light illuminated my high-end computer, my dual monitors, and the neatly labeled files that contained the financial lives of all my clients. And, in a separate, password-protected drive, the financial life of my mother. For a decade, I had done her books as a courtesy. It was simple stuff, mostly managing her pension payouts, her small investment portfolio, and paying her quarterly taxes. But for the last 5 years, ever since Jasper entered the picture, it had gotten messy. There were always anomalies. A $5,000 withdrawal from her retirement account that she'd forgotten about, which I'd later traced to a down payment on a car for Serafina. A lost credit card that had been used for a $3,000 shopping spree at a designer boutique, which I'd had to dispute and then quietly pay off from her savings to avoid a hit to her credit. I had always fixed it. I'd reallocated funds, balanced the losses, and given my mother a gentle lecture on budgeting, which she'd wave off with a laugh. "That's why I have you, Cora. You're my little numbers witch." Tonight, I wasn't her numbers witch. I was her auditor, and she was no longer my family, she was a client. A client I suspected was being defrauded. I logged into the secure portal I'd built for her accounts. My fingers flew across the keyboard, the rhythmic clack, 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 the only sound in the house. I opened a new file, MJENSEN, Forensic Audit. Case File 1. I started a full, deep dive reconciliation, beginning from the day Jasper married my sister. I worked with a cold, methodical precision. I wasn't Cora tonight. I was the professional they had all taken for granted. 2 hours later, my phone buzzed. It was my mother. I ignored it. It buzzed again, a text. "Margaret, you were incredibly rude tonight. You ruined my birthday." I stared at the text. No apology, no concern for the children, just blame. "Margaret, Serafina is very upset. You made her girls feel awkward." My thumb hovered over the reply button. I wanted to type, "They were eating $65 pasta while my children were given napkins." What awkwardness could possibly compare? But I didn't. A forensic accountant never shows her hand until she has the full report. Instead, I replied with 5 simple words. "We need to talk. My office." She replied instantly, "Your office. Don't be dramatic, just come over and apologize tomorrow." "Margaret, this is not a request. My office. Friday at 10 a.m. We will be discussing the systematic draining of your retirement accounts. Do not speak to Serafina or Jasper until after our meeting." My phone was silent for a full 5 minutes. I went back to my spreadsheets, my screen filling with lines of red ink flagging transactions that were no longer mistakes, but evidence. Finally, a new text popped up. "Margaret, fine." A chill ran down my spine. The battle had begun. But as I sat there, illuminated by the glow of the screen, a single, recurring thought kept looping in my mind, a line of foreshadowing for the bomb I was about to unearth. They all relied on my expertise, but they had forgotten one crucial thing. They had forgotten that I'm the one who keeps all the receipts. To understand the knife, you have to understand the hand that's holding it. And to understand my mother, Margaret, you have to understand her terror of not being perceived as wealthy. She was a beautiful woman who had married moderately well, and when my father passed away, he'd left her comfortable. Not rich, but comfortable. She had a nice house, a solid pension, and a healthy retirement portfolio. It was my job, as her loving and unpaid accountant, to make sure that comfortable lasted her another 30 years. I was the responsible one. I'd gone to college on a scholarship, worked my way up from an entry-level auditor to a partner in a forensic accounting firm. I married Mark, a solid, dependable engineer. We lived in a nice, modest suburb. We paid our bills. We were building a life, brick by boring, stable brick. Serafina was the exciting one. She was the whirlwind, the one my mother doted on, the one who, as Margaret always said, was meant for beautiful things. She de-drifted through college, changing her major from art history to communications before finally dropping out to find herself. What she found was Jasper. Jasper was a shark in a cashmere suit. He called himself a financial advisor, but I'd run a quiet check on him years ago. He had no real certifications, no affiliation with a major firm. He managed a private fund for a select clientele. He was all flash, the designer watch, the leased sports car, the talk of leveraging assets and minimizing tax exposure. He reeked of cheap cologne and bad debt. From the moment they'd met, Serafina's life had transformed. Suddenly, her lifestyle blog had professional photos. She was taking trips to Bali and Tuscany, tagging brands that never seemed to tag her back. She and Jasper lived in a sprawling, leased McMansion, throwing lavish parties that my mother would attend and rave about for weeks. "Isn't it wonderful, Cora?" Margaret would sigh, showing me photos on her phone. "Serafina is just thriving. Jasper is so good to her." I would just nod, my stomach tightening, because I was the one who saw the dark underbelly of that thriving. I was the one who saw the credit card statements. In the past, I'd confronted my mother about the money she was gifting Serafina. "Mom, you can't afford to give her $10,000 for a blogging conference in Paris," I depleted last year. "That's coming directly out of your principal." "Nonsense," Margaret had snapped, her face flushing. "A mother is allowed to support her children. You're just jealous, Cora, because you're stuck in that stuffy office all day while your sister is living. Jasper says it's a fantastic investment in her brand." That was the word, Jasper says. It had become Margaret's mantra. Jasper says her portfolio is too conservative. Jasper says she should be investing in his private fund. Jasper says I'm too old-fashioned. Until now, I had managed to hold him at bay. I'd put safeguards on my mother's accounts, set up alerts, and repeatedly demonstrated with charts and graphs why his investment strategies were nothing more than high-risk gambles. But I had done it as Cora, the daughter. I had been polite. I had been gentle. Now, as I sat in my office in the early hours of the morning, I was no longer Cora the daughter. I was Cora the forensic accountant, and I was treating this as a hostile audit. The deeper I dug, the sicker I felt. This wasn't just gifting. This was systematic, calculated theft. I found a line of credit I had no knowledge of, opened 6 months prior. The electronic signature on the application was my mother's, but the IP address on the application submission, it traced back to Serafina and Jasper's home. The entire $50,000 line of credit had been maxed out in 3 weeks. The purchases, a down payment on a boat, designer clothing, and a single $15,000 consulting fee paid directly to Jasper's firm. My blood ran cold. I kept digging. I found email chains. My mother, who was terrified of technology, had apparently given Serafina her email password to help her sort her bills. I found dozens of e-signature requests from banks and credit card companies, all with a single reply: authorized. But the replies were all sent at times when I knew my mother was at her bridge club or a garden party. They weren't just taking her money. They were using her identity to borrow new money. They were building a house of cards on her good credit, and the entire thing was about to collapse. The restaurant, the $65 pasta, the napkins, it all made a terrible, new kind of sense. The cruelty wasn't just a byproduct of her favoritism. It was a strategy. They had to isolate me. They had to marginalize me, make me seem jealous and petty, so that when the financial reckoning came, my mother would see me as the enemy, not them. They were positioning me as the bitter, unsuccessful daughter so that my professional warnings would sound like personal attacks. The final, horrifying realization dawned on me as the sun began to stream through my office window. The cruelty was the point. Humiliating me and my children was a way for my mother to justify her own actions to herself, to prove that Serafina was the good daughter who deserved the investment, while I was the ungrateful one who deserved nothing. I looked at the clock. 6:00 a.m. I had been working for 7 hours. I had a complete, itemized, and irrefutable case for felony fraud. I closed the spreadsheet and opened a new document. I began to draft my report. I was no longer just protecting my mother. I was building a case to save her from the vipers she had invited into her home. The next 2 days were a masterclass in compartmentalization. By day, I was supermom. I took Jack and Sophie to the park, we made a fortress of pillows in the living room, and I baked 3 batches of chocolate chip cookies. I listened to Jack's detailed, 10-year-old analysis of his new cast, and I let Sophie paint my fingernails a startling shade of glittery pink. I did not check my phone. I did not answer the calls from Margaret, which had gone from angry to pleading, and I did not exist as Cora the accountant. I was just mom, and I was patching the holes that my own mother had torn in my children's sense of security. But at night, after the kids were asleep, the fortress of pillows became a war room. I put my husband, Mark, on speakerphone. I walked him through everything, my voice low and steady as I detailed the fraud. "I'm booking a flight," he said immediately, his voice tight with rage. "I'll be home in 24 hours. "No," I said, and I was surprised by the steel in my own voice. "I don't need a protector, Mark. I need a witness. I'm handling this, but I need you to know what's happening, just in case." "Just in case of what, Cora?" "Just in case they're better at this than I think," I'd replied, but I knew they weren't. This was my world. They were amateurs. My clever trap wasn't just the audit. The audit was the ammunition. The trap was the meeting. I wasn't just going to tell my mother she was being robbed. I was going to show her, in a way that she, Serafina, and Jasper could not possibly escape. I spent the second night not on spreadsheets, but on the phone. I have a very particular set of skills, and over 15 years, I've built a very particular network. My first call was to a friend who worked in the state's corporate commission. "Hey, David," I said, sipping my now-cold coffee. "I need a favor. I need to know everything you can find on a consulting firm called Jasper Capital. And by everything, I mean I need to know if he's even solvent." My second call was to a private investigator I'd used on a corporate embezzlement case. Helen, it's Cora. I have a personal matter. I need a full asset check on two individuals, Jasper and Serafina last name. I'm looking for, let's call them undisclosed liabilities. I need to know who they owe money to. By 9:00 a.m. on Friday morning, just 1 hour before my scheduled meeting with my mother, my printer was humming. The report from David was exactly what I expected. Jasper's firm was a shell corporation, registered to a P.O. box. It had zero reportable assets and was, in fact, not in good standing with the state for failure to file annual reports or pay franchise taxes. He wasn't a shark. He was a bottom feeder, pretending to be a shark. But it was Helen's report that made my blood run cold and, simultaneously, sealed their fate. "You were right to be suspicious, Cora," Helen said over the phone. "This Jasper guy is a piece of work. He's not just in debt, he's drowning. I found 3 outstanding judgments against him in neighboring states for investment fraud. Small-time stuff, but the pattern is clear. He preys on vulnerable people, mostly retirees." My breath hitched. Go on. "And your sister, she's not just a lifestyle blogger. She's a co-conspirator. Her name is on the lease for that McMansion, which is currently in eviction proceedings. They're 2 months behind, and that's not all. I found a public record filing, a bank application. It looks like they're trying to buy a new property, a massive one, and they're applying for the loan with a cosigner." A cold, heavy stone dropped in my stomach. My mother. "Looks like it," Helen said. "The application was filed 3 days ago. They're moving fast, Cora. They're not just draining her accounts. They're trying to use her for one last, big score before her credit is completely destroyed." This was the endgame, the B. Oh, the clothes, the trips. That was just them bleeding her. This mortgage was them going for the kill. They were going to leverage her good name to secure a multi-million-dollar property, default on the first payment, and leave her holding the bag, completely bankrupt. And she would be, because they had already stolen all her liquid assets. I hung up the phone. My anger was so pure, so potent, it was almost silent. At 9:50 a.m., I was in my office's conference room. It was a glass box, intimidating and sterile. I had the large screen monitor at the head of the table queued up. I had 3 binders on the table, one for me, one for my mother, and one for my lawyer who was sitting quietly in the corner on the clock as an impartial witness. At 10:00 a.m. on the dot, my mother, Margaret, walked in. She was not alone. She had brought Serafina and Jasper with her. "Cora, this is ridiculous," Margaret announced, sweeping into the room. "Bringing me to your office like a child, and I brought Serafina and Jasper since this seems to be about them." "Good," I said, my voice echoing slightly in the large room. "You just saved me a step. Please sit." Serafina and Jasper looked smug. They thought this was an ambush. They thought I was going to cry or yell or plead. They thought this was a family argument, and they knew how to win those. They had forgot. This wasn't a home. This was a boardroom, and I was the one holding the meeting. Margaret sat at the head of the table, flanked by her 2 pet vipers. Serafina was examining her nails, already looking bored. Jasper, ever the advisor, leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, projecting an air of amused condescension. "All right, Cora," Jasper said, taking charge. "Margaret tells me you're having some feelings about the birthday dinner, if you're looking for an apology for your kid's behavior." "This is not a social call, Jasper," I cut in. The sound of my own voice, crisp and professional, silenced him instantly. "This is a financial review. Mom, as we discussed, I've completed an audit of your accounts." "An audit?" Margaret scoffed. "Cora, darling, don't be so dramatic. It's just my little pension." "It was your little pension," I said, sliding one of the thick, 3-ring binders across the polished mahogany table. It landed in front of her with a heavy, definitive thud. "As of this morning, it's a crime scene." The color drained from Margaret's face. Serafina sat up straight, her bored expression replaced by a flash of panic. "What is this?" Margaret whispered, her hand hovering over the binder, afraid to touch it. That, I said, is a detailed report of the last 24 months of your financial life. It documents, with receipts, every wire transfer, every credit card charge, and every gift that you didn't authorize. I picked up my remote and clicked. The large monitor on the wall lit up. The first slide was a simple scan of a document. This, I said, is a credit application for a $50,000 line of credit taken out in your name 6 months ago. The signature is yours, or a very good forgery of it. The funds, as you'll see on page 4 of your binder, were transferred out in less than 3 weeks. I clicked to the next slide, a pie chart. 90% of that $50,000, I continued, was spent on non-essentials. A $15,000 consulting fee to Jasper Capital, LLC, which, by the way, is a defunct shell corporation. A $10,000 down payment on a boat, and various charges at designer boutiques. I needed a new laptop, Serafina blurted out, her voice high and thin, and that consulting fee was for my brand. Jasper is growing my brand. Your brand, Serafina? I said, turning to her. Or your debt, because this line of credit has not received a single payment. It is currently in default, and it has dropped our mother's credit score by 120 points. Now, hold on, Jasper interjected, his voice losing its smooth edge. We are leveraging assets. It's a standard wealth-building strategy. You wouldn't understand, Cora. This is high-level finance. Is it? I clicked the remote. The next slide was the logo for a high-end marina. Then let's talk about the boat. Page 12 of your binder, Mom. It's a 30-foot speedboat. It's not registered in your name or even Serafina's. It's registered solely in Jasper's. Margaret's head snapped toward him. A boat, you bought a boat. It's an investment, Margaret, Jasper said, his face reddening. We're going to use it for influencer events. You used my mother's retirement money to buy yourself a toy, I stated, my voice flat. And you did it by forging her signature on a loan application. That's not high-level finance, Jasper. That's wire fraud. The room was silent. My lawyer in the corner simply cleared his throat and continued taking notes. Serafina turned on me, her eyes flashing with venom. You did this. You're trying to turn her against us. You've always been jealous. Yo. You are just a sad little bean counter, and you can't stand that I'm successful. Are you successful, Serafina? I asked calmly. I clicked to the final slide. It was a legal document, a notice of eviction. This was filed 4 days ago, I said, as Serafina's face turned white. You are 2 months behind on the lease for your McMansion. You're not successful, Serafina. You're insolvent. You and Jasper have been systematically stealing from our mother to fund a lifestyle you can't afford, and you've been doing it for years. This was the first confrontation. The first reveal. Jasper's reaction was exactly what I'd predicted. He didn't crumble, he attacked. You're a liar, he shouted, standing up so fast his chair screeched. This is slander. You've fabricated all of this. Margaret, are you going to let her talk to us this way? We are your family. She's just a bitter woman who was angry about a dinner. Yes, Mom, Serafina chimed in, tears welling in her eyes, perfect crocodile tears. She's trying to cut us out. She's always wanted you all to herself. She's trying to steal you from us. She's trying to steal our inheritance. Inheritance? I laughed. It was a cold, sharp sound that surprised even me. There is no inheritance. They've spent it all. Look at page 30, Mom. Your retirement account is empty. Your savings are gone. The only thing you have left is your house, and as of this morning, they're trying to steal that too. Margaret looked from me to Serafina, her face a mask of utter confusion and horror. What? What does she mean? Jasper? Serafina, what does she mean? Jasper just pointed a trembling finger at me. She's lying. This is a setup. We're leaving. Margaret, we're leaving. He grabbed Serafina's arm and stormed out of the conference room. Margaret didn't move. She just stared at the eviction notice on the screen. Cora, she whispered, her voice trembling, tell me this isn't true. Tell me my grandchildren, the pasta. The pasta, Mom, I said, my voice softening for the first time, was a $1,200 catering order from La Pura Vida, paid for with that fraudulent credit card. It was a party to celebrate the new mortgage application they'd filed in your name. I watched as the final piece clicked into place. The cruelty wasn't an accident, it was a celebration. They were toasting their final victory over her and over me. "Oh, God," she whimpered, and for the first time, my mother, Margaret the matriarch, the strong one, crumpled in on herself. What have I done? The following week was a descent into a new kind of hell. Margaret was a broken woman. She stayed in my guest room, refusing to answer her phone, which was now blowing up with alternating vitriolic texts from Jasper and sobbing, manipulative voicemails from Serafina. "Mommy, how could you believe her? She's poisoning you against me. I have nowhere to go. Jasper is saying this is all my fault. Margaret, you are making a catastrophic mistake. You have 24 hours to come to your senses and fire that little witch, or I will be forced to take legal action for defamation." It was a desperate, pathetic attempt to regain control, but the spell wasn't just broken, it was shattered. The problem was, Margaret was still struggling. "But Cora," she'd say, wringing her hands at my kitchen table, he's her husband. Serafina loves him. Maybe he just made some bad investments. Maybe it's a misunderstanding." "Mom," I said, pushing another one of Helen's reports across the table, "he didn't make a bad investment. He is the bad investment." The investigation hadn't stopped. It had escalated. While Jasper and Serafina were busy with their emotional siege, I was building the fortress walls. Helen had dug deeper, and what she found was no longer just a history of small-time fraud. It was a pattern of predatory behavior. "I found them, Cora," Helen had told me, her voice grim. "Two other clients, both retirees, both widows. Both met Jasper through a wealth management seminar at a local community center. Both are now in foreclosure." I had Helen arrange a conference call. I sat my mother down and had her listen, on speakerphone, as a woman named Mrs. Petrov, her voice frail and cracking, detailed how a charming man named Jasper had helped her invest her late husband's pension into a private fund that had vanished, along with Jasper. Margaret listened, her face ashen, her hand over her mouth. By the time the call was over, she was shaking. The last vestige of her denial had been obliterated. This wasn't her son-in-law. This was a monster she had welcomed into her home, a monster she had fed with her own retirement and almost her daughter's. He did this to other people," she whispered. "Yes, Mom," I said, my voice firm but not unkind. "He's a con artist, and Serafina is his accomplice. She's not a victim, Mom, she's a partner. She's the one who gets him in the door." His was the second, more powerful confrontation. It wasn't with them, it was with the truth, and it finally, irrevocably, broke the spell. Margaret's grief turned, hard and sharp, into a righteous fury I had never seen from her before. "He won't get away with it," she said, her voice a low growl. "Not this time." "No, he won't," I agreed. "But we have to be smart. He thinks he's fighting me, the angry daughter. He's about to find out he's fighting you, the client, and me, the expert witness." We had one final, massive piece of leverage, the mortgage application. The bank had scheduled the final signing. It was, ironically, Serafina and Jasper's last-ditch effort. They had no idea Margaret was now with me. They believed, in their staggering arrogance, that they could still push the deal through, get the money, and disappear. They had been hounding the bank, claiming Margaret was ill and that they had her power of attorney. The bank, confused by the conflicting messages, had set a final in-person verification meeting. It was, essentially, a showdown. I spent the next 2 days prepping my mother. I walked her through the reports. I had my lawyer draft a new, ironclad power of attorney, signing full financial control over to me. I also had him draft a cease and desist letter and a legally binding repayment agreement. "Are you ready for this, Mom?" I asked her the morning of the meeting. She was dressed in a sharp navy blue suit, her hair perfectly in place. She looked, for the first time in years, like the strong, formidable woman I remembered from my childhood. "Cora," she said, looking me straight in the eye. "He ate my nest egg. He tried to eat my house. He humiliated my grandchildren. I'm not just ready, I'm hungry." The bank's conference room was all glass and polished steel, designed to project an image of unbreakable stability. It felt, to me, like the perfect arena. Jasper and Serafina were already seated when we arrived. They had dressed for the part. Jasper was in his most successful suit, radiating false confidence. Serafina was in a soft, cream-colored dress, her hair down, the picture of innocent, wealthy wife. When Margaret and I walked in, their faces froze. Jasper's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. Serafina's eyes widened in genuine panic. They had not expected my mother, and they certainly had not expected her to be flanked by me and my lawyer, Mr. Davies. "Margaret," Jasper said, recovering instantly, his voice booming with false warmth. "We were so worried. Thank goodness you're here. Your daughter has been... Well, we can discuss that later. We're just so glad you're well enough to sign." He gestured to the bank manager, a man named Mr. Henderson, who looked flustered. "Mr. Henderson, this is a wonderful day. As you can see, my mother-in-law is here, and we're all ready to finalize this wonderful new home." Mr. Henderson looked at us, his brow furrowed. "Mrs. Jensen, I have to admit I'm confused. Your daughter, Cora, called yesterday as your financial representative and it's a good thing she did," Margaret said, her voice ringing with clarity and command. She didn't even look at Jasper. She addressed the bank manager. "Mr. Henderson, I apologize for the confusion. I am here to personally clarify the situation. I will not be co-signing any loan today. In fact, I am here to close all of my accounts with this bank." The color drained from Jasper's face. Serafina let out a small, strangled gasp. "Mommy, what are you doing? This is our home, you promised." "I promised nothing," Margaret said, turning to her, her eyes cold. "You forged my name on a line of credit. You stole my savings. You lied to me." "That's a lie," Jasper shouted, slamming his hand on the table. "This is her," he pointed at me. "She's poisoned you. This is defamation. Mr. Henderson, I am suing this bank and I am suing her." "Before you do that, Mr. Jasper," my lawyer, Mr. Davies, said, speaking for the first time. He slid a thick, bound document across the table. "You should review this. It's a full forensic audit of Mrs. Jensen's accounts, detailing, with receipts, every fraudulent charge, every unauthorized transfer, and every forged signature. I've already taken the liberty of sending a copy to the state attorney's office." Jasper stared at the binder as if it were a snake. "And," I added, sliding a second, smaller file over, "this is the report from the private investigator detailing your existing judgments for investment fraud in 2 other states. I've sent that to the DA's white-collar crime division. They seemed very interested." This was the public humiliation, the final, systematic exposure. Jasper looked from the binder to me, and for the first time, I didn't see a shark. I saw a terrified, cornered rat. Serafina, seeing her entire lifestyle evaporate, finally broke. This was her realization. This was her moment. But it wasn't one of clarity. It was ni of pure, unfiltered rage. She didn't lunge at me. She lunged at Jasper. "You," she shrieked, her voice echoing in the sterile room. She hit him hard on the chest with her balled-up fists. "You told me it was fine. You told me it was legal. You told me she'd never find out. You ruined my life." "Get off me, you idiot," Jasper hissed, grabbing her wrists, his mask of sophistication completely gone. "This is your fault. It was your mother." "Mr. Henderson," Mr. Davies said calmly, over the sounds of the scuffle, "I believe we have concluded our business here." The bank manager, his face pale with shock, just nodded. He pressed a small button on his desk phone. "Security, please." Margaret, my mother, stood up. She straightened her suit jacket. She looked down at her daughter, who was now sobbing on the floor as 2 security guards entered the room. "Serafina," Margaret said, her voice wasn't angry, it was just empty. "You can eat when you get home." She then turned, looked at me, and for the first time in my entire adult life, she looked at me with something that wasn't just approval. It was awe. I just nodded, picked up my briefcase, and held the door open for her. We walked out of the bank, leaving the wreckage behind us. The downfall was not a dramatic courtroom explosion. It was, fittingly, a quiet, systematic liquidation. Jasper, faced with irrefutable proof of fraud and a history of similar crimes, was arrested. The Attorney General, spurred by my audit and the testimony of Mrs. Petrov and the other victims, took the case. He was denied bail. His lifestyle was revealed to be a house of cards so flimsy that a single breath of legal trouble brought it all down. Serafina, in a last-ditch effort to save herself, tried to claim she was a victim, too, a poor, manipulated wife. But the email chains, the e-signatures sent from her phone, and the fact that every single one of Jasper's investment victims had been introduced to him by a new friend who looked remarkably like her, painted a different picture. She was charged as an accomplice. My mother, Margaret, was the star witness. I sat with her as she gave her deposition, her voice clear and unwavering as she detailed, line by line, the trust she had placed in her daughter and the man she had welcomed as a son, and how they had methodically betrayed it. In the end, I used my professional network for one last act of justice. I made sure the Asset Forfeiture Division knew about the boat, the leased cars, and the designer wardrobe. It was all seized. It wouldn't be enough to pay back everyone he'd conned, but it was a start. Jasper took a plea deal and is now serving a 7 to 10 year sentence. Serafina, in exchange for her testimony against him, received 5 years probation and a court-ordered repayment plan that will follow her for the rest of her life. The McMansion was repossessed. The brand was deleted. The last I heard, Serafina was working as a cashier, living in a one-bedroom apartment. Her daughters, the ones with the refined palates, were back in public school. But the real resolution wasn't in their ruin. It was in our rebuilding. My mother sold her house, the one filled with so many complicated memories. She used the proceeds to pay off the fraudulent line of credit and to settle her debts. She moved into a smaller, brighter condo near me, very near me. Our relationship isn't perfect. There's a scar there, and it will always be there. But the pretense is gone. The favoritism, which I now understood was a symptom of her own insecurity, was gone. What was left was something quieter and more honest. One evening, about 6 months after the bank meeting, my husband Mark was back. The kids were doing homework, and Margaret was in my kitchen helping me cook. Not directing, not criticizing. Helping. She was chopping carrots with a surprising amount of vigor. "Cora," she said, not looking up, I was at the lawyer's office today. I updated my will." "Oh, Mom, you don't have to." "I do," she said. "Everything is being left in a trust for Jack and Sophie to be managed by you. Serafina, she gets $1, and a letter, just in case she ever tries to contest it." I stopped stirring the pot. "That's very final, Mom." She finally looked at me, her eyes clear. The dinner, that night, I knew what I was doing. I was so afraid of what they'd become and so angry at you for being right that I was cruel. It's the only thing I truly cannot forgive myself for. "I know, Mom," I said. "I can't fix what I did to Serafina," she said, "or what she did to me, but I can make sure. I can make sure you are never, ever punished for being the smart, capable one again. I am so very proud of you, Cora." The thank you stuck in my throat, thick with 15 years of waiting. That Friday, I took Jack and Sophie out. I took them to La Pura Vida. We didn't sit in the main dining room. I'd made a spec. I'll request. We sat at the chef's table, right in the kitchen. The head chef, who I'd met through a client, came out. "So," he boomed, "I hear we have 2 food critics in the house." Jack and Sophie, who were overwhelmed and giddy, just nodded. "Well," he said, "I was told you were denied my famous truffle pasta. We can't have that." He brought out 2 massive, steaming, $65 bowls of pasta just for them. And for me, he brought a simple salad. I watched my children eat, their faces alight with joy, the memory of the napkins finally being replaced by this one. They ate with the uncomplicated hunger of children who know, without a shadow of a doubt, that they are safe, they are loved, and they will always have a place at the table. I took a bite of my salad. It was the most delicious thing I had ever tasted. I was at peace, vindicated, and, for the first time, I was full.